I'd like to hear more about what your experience has been traveling around the country, because I think the sort of $64,000 question is what's going to happen in the fall. So it did seem like the Democratic Party's belief, and I heard spokespeople say this at the time. I remember having people come on the Hill and make this case back in the day, was that the genocide. They obviously didn't refer to it as a genocide, but the conflict in quotation marks was going to be wrapped up by election day. They didn't. The Democratic Party didn't have to worry about the political ramifications of supporting, funding, enabling Israel's genocide. That the campus protests were going to go away. That the summer was going to basically kill them all. Like in the mall, in the encampments, et cetera. They didn't have anything to worry about. And they do go away during the summer, but obviously the prediction that the Democratic Party wasn't going to be hurt by its enabling of a genocide did not come to fruition. We have the IMEU study that shows that the single largest issue that motivated the voters who voted for Biden in 2020 but declined to do so in 2024 was Gaza. Now we're under a Trump administration. So there is more interest among some Democrats in criticizing the actions of our government because it no longer falls at the feet of Joe Biden. But it's kind of an open question as to what the protests look like in the fall, given that we're now under an even more authoritarian leadership, which has demonstrated a willingness to not just deport people with some kind of uncertain visa status, but people who are green card holders and legal in every way, shape, or form, and even at times Americans. And of course, he's now actively threatening Zohran Mamdani now that he's won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York. So I'm curious what kind of energy you've perceived as you visited campuses and what you sort of predict for how this is going to escalate or manifest in the fall.
Yeah, it's a really scary and difficult question. And, I think the short answer is I don't know. And I think the longer answer is that as I've been visiting campuses, I get asked a lot of questions about what do we do. And what I find is that I don't have the answers, but folks that I'm meeting on campuses who understand the specificities of their different institutions are doing incredible work. I mean, these are small groups of people. I don't know what kind of, critical mass they'll get, but there's organizing, there's folks who are really thinking about how, and I think this is within individual institutions, but how to push back on the institutional mechanisms that have made protest almost impossible, that have made speech, very dangerous. And I think that there's a lot that's happening underground that's strategizing, that's thinking about these individual cases. And that brings me like a small thread of hope. But I think the thing that scares me is that I don't see any real change or resistance to be possible until there's a widespread critical mass, until there's, across institutions, across states, across the country, a very real commitment to pushing back against the ways in which institutions are complying with first the Biden administration, now the Trump administration. There's so much insecurity around funding at so many schools. Administrators are willing to do anything in order to ensure that their donors continue to, contribute. That's one of the reasons that I was fired, is there were so many threats of withholding funding. And I think we've seen from like Harvard to Columbia that capitulating with the Trump administration actually doesn't get you anything. And so what scares me the most is that I think we're so fractured and we're so divided that folks are really wrapped up in their, how do I stay safe? How do I make sure I don't lose my salary? I don't lose my health insurance. I don't lose, the home that I've been struggling to afford, because unless you're at Harvard, if you're a college or university professor, you're probably not making a lot of money. We've seen salary compression for years. And so I think people are really scared and they're keeping their heads down and not wanting to rock the boat. And I think for folks who are not immediately vulnerable, who are, not green card holders, who are not on student visas, who have citizenship and are not on the verge of being denaturalized. I think now is a time to really think about the fact that we are going to continue down this road towards absolute destruction of higher ed and everything else that we, hold dear in this country if folks aren't really willing to think about general strikes, large scale organizing, the ability to lose things that were perhaps imagined as secure for a while. I think, I talk to folks and they want change, but they don't want to give things up. And there's no, revolutionary movement that doesn't come with great cost and great loss. And I've just had so many conversations with folks who are not ready to give those things up, even if they're not benefiting from the status quo at all. So it's hard. It feels like a very American problem to just
Yes.
see that there's just no real commitment and understanding of what community care looks like, of what revolutionary action looks like, of, strikes and movements and resistance, and an understanding that you don't get rewarded for this behavior. Nobody's going to pat you on the head. You might lose your job. You might lose your health care. You might, end up in situations that are really untenable. But what are we willing to sacrifice in order to push back against this monster? It's really, and I think higher ed becomes this sort of crucible in which we're seeing so many different struggles clarified. This is not just a problem with higher ed, but we're seeing it very clearly because higher ed becomes lionized as this space of free expression and free speech. And the chilling effect is terrifying, because the question that I want to know from my colleagues is, if you're scared to go into the classroom and teach the things you've been teaching, if you're scared to have conversations with your students because they might be recording you, if you're scared to push back against your administration because you're afraid that you're going to be fired, what on earth are we doing? What are our jobs? What are we here for? That's not education. It's not research. It's not academia. Um, yeah, I feel very bleak and hopeless. And also, I'm a natural optimist. So it's very confusing. But I think, we need to be prepared for loss. People are losing things every day. There's real sacrifice that needs to be made.
I think that's such an important point. It has been difficult to watch, students who participated in the encampments and the protests tweeting and talking about how difficult it is to find a job and unsure, having that sort of insecurity of, is it me? Am I a bad candidate? Is it just a bad job market? Or am I seeing the consequence of having been doxxed and blacklisted the way all of these billionaires pledged to do? The Bill Ackmans and the Howard Schultzes, who said, you'll never work in this town again, basically, because you participated in an anti-genocide protest. And seeing, young people and folks that have relatively little as compared to people in power, whether they're, elected officials who've stayed silent, millionaire leadership within the Democratic Party who've stayed silent, certain, whether it's celebrities or other kinds of people who have a lot of resources and have a lot of more of an ability to withstand loss, to your point, not doing as much, it seems, repeatedly than the people who have very little and a lot to use. And even in the sort of media sector, I've had that frustration, right? I mean, I was deeply frustrated and angered by the fact that in the wake of October 7th, the three Muslim news anchors that existed in mainstream were pulled from the air. It has also been frustrating that one of them, the one that was permanently removed and was not allowed to return to MSNBC, declined to say that that's why he was let go, or really call out MSNBC in any meaningful way for censoring someone on the basis of their political ideology and their, frankly, religion. And instead, take the golden parachute and use it to start a new news organization, which is beneficial. And, I understand these are hard choices, but it is difficult to sort of observe who's taking kind of hard hits and who isn't. And that it repeatedly does seem to be people who have more to lose, or I shouldn't say that, maybe people who have less to lose, but people for whom the loss is more greatly felt as a consequence, being the ones that are left holding the bag over and over and over again. I don't know. I think your characterization of as a deeply American problem, where we're feeling very individualized and there's no sense of like, or very little, relatively little sense of sort of collective fight, is part of the problem. But on the optimistic side of things, I do think that because of decades of sort of working class immiseration and increasingly the bourgeois class even feeling insecure, as you articulated as a, a professor, it doesn't, we're the whole idea of the PMC is that we're being offered these trappings of sort of erudition and kind of class accomplishment without the financial payoff. So there's still this sort of like insecurity that I think has caused there to be a sort of rise of class traders within the petite bourgeois class. That is, I think, getting people to a point where they're at a tipping point. And that gives me at least some small comfort as I watch folks who I've never heard in the past be sympathetic toward Bernie or sympathetic to anything slowly come around to the idea that they deserve better and that the Democratic Party isn't fighting hard enough for them and that maybe better things are possible and that maybe Zohran Mamdani is right. And like, I do feel that as well. Do you?
I do. And, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about how, to your point about vulnerability, the students that I have talked to and who I've met and who I just follow on social media and feel like I've gotten to know them through the news because they've been so central to the encampments. They've been so brave. They've been willing to get arrested. They've been willing to get brutalized. Every time I watch that video from UCLA, it's so terrifying the way so many young people and some faculty and staff have put their safety, their lives, in addition to their future on the line. And I think these students understand in ways that so many Americans do not, that, the vulnerabilities that they are experiencing are not, in the American sense, things that should be sort of pushed aside in order to access whiteness and upward mobility and the American dream, but instead as a way of thinking in connection with, folks in Palestine, with folks in Sudan, with folks in the Congo, with folks in the south side of Chicago and Harlem, in terms of how our institutions are gentrifying and destroying neighborhoods. I think as I've seen students make these really powerful connections, this is why they're so dangerous to these institutions. They're not doing the job of clawing at upward mobility and, entry into whiteness and, entry into the professional class that they're supposed to be doing at these institutions. They're instead understanding themselves as part of a bigger collective that they are willing to fight for, and they're willing to lose things and sacrifice themselves for. It's, I get emotional when I think about it because I see hope and possibility in that wide, expansive understanding of collective that's beyond the nation state, that's beyond class, that's beyond race, all of these things. And I think the thing that I am waiting for is for those of us, and I consider myself part of it. I was a professor for 12 years. I went to graduate school. I thought I was on a path to upward mobility. I understood my life in a particular kind of way. Turned out that that was not real. But I think there are so many of us who, even though we're never going to benefit from the American economy in the way that our parents maybe did, there's this sort of fantasy that perhaps it's possible, perhaps if I just work hard, perhaps. And I do also think, and I think, the Mamdani campaign is evidence of this. And, I don't want to get too, I'm not a political scientist, but I do think that I'm seeing more and more people in my generation being like, wait a second, actually, the ruling class doesn't give a shit about me, if I can curse.
Yeah. Yes.
And, I'm being, they're training AI to replace me. They're, going to
Yes.
evict me. They're canceling my health insurance. I thought that I had the security and I don't even have it. And that gives me, as depressing as that is, I think being forced to actually grapple with our vulnerabilities is absolutely critical. And I think we are seeing it in different spaces. I just wonder what it's going to take for a much larger connected movement.
Yeah, I will say, I don't know if you saw Hakeem Jeffries posted that picture of himself in those goofy formal sneakers that he always wears, holding a baseball bat, tweeting something about how like he's ready to go after the big beautiful bill, and everybody dragging him over it. I think there is a real sort of mask off moment that we're in the middle of with the Democratic Party, where people who have been very protective of it up until this point, even going so far as to excuse Biden and Harris's complicity in the genocide last fall, are now like, okay, like Trump is here and he's doing all the bad things, and you're still so impotent, you're still so inept. Like the Democratic Party really isn't fighting for us. I mean, I was talking to a friend recently who, you know, I don't think it was particularly sort of left, you know, Bernie curious or anything like that, who sort of extemporaneously said to me after listening to a recent episode, oh, it's almost like the two parties are working with one goal, and we don't even really have an opposition party. And I'm like, Jack Nicholson meme, yes. Like, yes, exactly. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful about that. I also have seen this like tipping point. I'm sure you saw the news clip, you know, that was sort of viral over the last few days on MSNBC or CNN, where they're talking about how public opinion has shifted so wildly with respect to Israel-Palestine, with majorities supporting Palestine and being critical of Israel's genocide.
Andrew Cuomo, during the primary, attacked Mamdani as being insufficiently pro-Israel. I'm not quite sure the former governor understood how much the politics have changed around this issue among Democrats. What are we talking about here? All right, who Democrats sympathize more with, Israelis or Palestinians? In 2017, the Democratic Party was a pro-Israeli party. Look at this. They sympathized with the Israelis by 13 points, more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. But look at this sea change. Now Democrats sympathize more with the Palestinians by 43 points. Oh, my God, that is a change in the margin of 56 points over the course of just 8 years. So all of a sudden, it's the pro-Palestinian position that actually reigns supreme in Democratic politics, not the Israeli position. And that is part of the reason why Mamdani was able to do so well in this primary, because those attacks over Israel, simply put, did not ring true for Democrats. They're now on the side of the Palestinians, not the Israelis.
I mean, this is a much bigger issue, specifically with Mamdani, though. I mean, an outspoken critic of Israel. He's facing continued criticism, though, for not being outspoken enough against anti-Semitism, that is for sure. But on this, talk about Democrats and how broadly how this really is shifting.
Yeah, so, you know, you see this among Democrats overall, right? But we know that Mamdani's base was younger voters within the Democratic Party. And so I want to break it down
with younger Democrats.
Correct. So take a look here. Who age 18 to 49 Democrats sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Again, in 2017, younger Democrats sympathize more with the Israelis by 14 points. Look at this shift now. Palestinians, they sympathize more with the Palestinians by 57 points. That is an over 70-point shift in the margin in just a matter of 8 years. So the bottom line is, Mamdani's base within the Democratic Party and the base of the Democratic Party of younger voters, younger Democrats, have changed tremendously on this issue in 8 years' time. I rarely ever see shifts like this, Kate, in which you see one side of the equation leading by 14 points 8 years ago, and then all of a sudden the other side of the equation leading by 57 points. The bottom line is the politics around the Israelis and the Palestinians have shifted tremendously among Democrats, and they've shifted specifically tremendously among Democrats who are under the age of 50, younger Democrats who are Mamdani's base, and also the base of Democratic socialists like himself, like Bernie Sanders, like AOC. They have just shifted more so than I think that anyone could possibly have imagined, say, 8 years ago.
Which is unsurprising given, of course, the news stories that we've seen in the last year and a half, of course, but even in the last week or so, the Haaretz reporting about U.S. contractors firing live ammunition at Gazans at the aid sites, you know, on camera saying, hell yeah, you know, I got one, intentionally taking aim at people who you've induced to come there to get aid, which in many cases it's now being reported was expired and is causing people to have gastrointestinal systems when they make the sacrifice to come and risk their lives to get it in the first place. You have, of course, also in the last week, the Israeli strike on the Gaza seafront cafe that killed at least 20 Palestinians who are going there as it's one of the last places to get internet access, including journalists who are trying to report out stories about what's going on in Israel, which of course denies outside journalists access to cover what's been going on there. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the assault that's been going on against journalists over the past year and a half and more, right? Long before October 7th. But since October 7th, it's the largest death toll for journalists in the history of any kind of international conflict. I mean, no wonder, right? No wonder the polls are what they are. And again, there's something hopeful about that. Except, sorry to be so all over the place with this, except for the more blatant the crimes are, and the continued movement politically, lack of movement politically, the absence of accountability politically, there is a way that it almost becomes more desperate and overwhelming. Because it's so obviously not an issue of awareness. It's the same as what you were describing, these institutional factors at the university, and it seems like in every institutional context, politically or whatever, that are driving decision-making as opposed to popular sentiment, democracy, voting, driving decision-making.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listening to you speak, I'm thinking of two things. One, I'm thinking you had asked earlier about family, and, my father and I have been arguing, which is a nice way of saying fighting about Palestine since 1996. And I don't think he would ever have identified as a Zionist, but we definitely were not on the same page. And starting in January, he started referring to the genocide as a genocide. And, our politics are still not aligned, but, we're much more on the same page than we have since the 90s. And, my partner asked, what's changed? And he was like, you can only see so many dead babies. And I think the thing that I've been watching, and, you're a journalist, I'm a writer. I think that I've sort of seen this collapse when so much of how I understood the world for a while was, if people just see the truth, if they just see reality, that is going to change hearts and minds. And on the one hand, that is actually happening. We're seeing a live stream genocide. We're seeing a movement in support of Palestinian liberation like there's never been on a global level. And at the same time, there's this disconnect between a real change, I would say, in like larger American popular opinion about Palestine, and the just complete disconnect, revealing the ways in which we do not and have never actually lived in a democracy. I mean, if mass movements are not transforming policy, then what on earth is even happening? And I think those of us who have been paying attention have known that that's actually how the United States works for a very long time. But I think the thing that is just wild to me is that the Israeli Hasbara media world has never, they'll deny that they, in the first year, they would deny that they bombed hospitals, and they would justify why they would bomb hospitals. But it's been quite a while now that there's just been this sort of blatant, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And watching American corporate media continue to toe the line of like, it's not a genocide. They're not bombing hospitals. They're not, and to the point in which I know people who are actually going to Haaretz and other Israeli outlets in order to actually get news, which actually breaks my brain. Trying to think about, how this actually works. And so I think the thing that I am just completely stuck on over the past 2 years is seeing the way that my sense of reality and what it is that I've been invested in as a teacher, as a writer, as somehow revealing stories that I believe can be transformative, has been completely broken by the way global capital and imperialism works, to the point in which, regardless of whether there's a genocide being live streamed, if you are in US government and the Israeli state comes to you and says, we're going to bring you to Tel Aviv, we're going to wine you and dine you, we're going to show you how beautiful this is and how this is what you've got to protect, and then we're going to give you thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to protect this, the Israeli state can do whatever they want. Because as long as the money is flowing and the US is still being supported as being the greatest arms dealer in the US, how is policy going to change? And this is where I get stuck, where I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so we've all sort of gotten to this point. I think, so for me, and maybe I should get him back on the podcast. We did an episode maybe a year ago with a guy who basically oversaw the kind of shipping embargo aspect of BDS. So organizing the dock workers who just refused to ship, enable the shipments to Israel in the first place of bombs and such. And that episode, and realizing that kind of activism is happening, does feel really energizing because it's so concrete. We're not waiting for, some international organization to review an appeal to see if someone has done a genocide, and then they say something's a genocide, but there's no accountability mechanism because, there's no accountability without an army. Like, there's no accountability without force. That's the reality of the world. That I think is kept veiled from us as we grow up learning about the UN and laws and justice and the Supreme Court. We're all finding out real quick that none of that matters. And the only thing that matters is who controls the gun. And America has the biggest guns. And Israel's greatest ally. So here we are. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.